Good morning, dear colleagues. I welcome you at the British webinar to increase efficiency of dairy farms. I'm Maxim Tkachenko, editor-in-chief of the Dairy Net Journal. It is the third time when I act as the moderator of this event. It is obvious that now we have to hold it online, but I'm sure that it will not affect our communication. Today, leading dairy experts from the UK will share their experience, starting from dairy farm management and up to selecting dairy equipment and feeding. To start with, I pass the floor to the Commissioner for Trade and for Eastern Europe and Central Europe, Judith Slater.
Can you hear me well? Super. Well, good morning, and thank you very much for joining the British Dairy webinar for Eastern Europe and Central Asia Network, which has been organised by our embassy in Kiev. This is one of a series of events within the Great Agri campaign, which our region is organising under the Department for International Trade. We are very keen to make these webinars very practical and useful for you, and to highlight the most relevant areas where the UK can help. The UK combines centuries of expertise with innovation, which we think is a really important and powerful combination. The UK is itself the world's 10th largest dairy producing country and the 3rd biggest in Europe. In addition, and very importantly, the UK is a global leader in developing animal health products and services for the nutrition, genetics, farm management, prevention and treatment of animal diseases and health across all animal species. And the UK is widely recognised for its ability to develop and bring new animal products and solutions to the market. British companies are already collaborating actively with farmers and agricultural ministries in the countries of this very large and diverse region of 14 countries. And for example, our exhibition stands in Ukraine each year at the big Agri Fair gather over 20 British exhibitors. And I very much enjoyed my own visit last year to this fair. And I can well remember the diversity of the British participants, which ranged from JCB, huge agricultural vehicles, through to innovative products for milking and getting more milk from cows, through to ways of semen and producing better species of sheep. It was a whole range, and it was a wonderful experience to be there. We're really keen to ensure continuity and certainty in the existing trade between the UK and the countries of Eastern Europe and Central Asia. And I hope by doing so, we can build on our mutual trade relations and grow business together. So I'm sorry that I'm not able to be with you in person, but webinars are a really good substitute for getting together in person. And I look forward to visiting again when the conditions allow. And I'd like to wish everybody a really interesting and fruitful seminar today. And I hope it goes really, really well. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. And I do hope that you will soon join us live, offline. And a couple of organizational aspects. Our webinar is going to have a Q&A format. So actually, I will address the questions to the speakers. You can also ask your questions in the chat box for under our YouTube broadcast. So it will take 2 hours. And before we pass the floor to our first speaker, I would like to express gratitude to our sponsors, Agralis, milkrite, InterPuls and RCVS. Actually, our first speaker is going to be Neil Birkett, Manager for Business Development in the UK and export countries in Volac. More than 40 years of experience in dairy. He passed the way from manager to trader in feeds. He recently has been the manager for feeds for Volac and Volac Miller. The floor is yours. Neil, welcome.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the welcome. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to you in this webinar.
So the first question, Neil, that I would like to address to you, it is also about my experience of talking to various advisors, consultants who mention that in Ukraine, there is the European farm management system, under which, above all, we focus on feeding, while it is counterposed to the Northern American model, which seems to be more suitable for Ukraine, where they focus more on reproduction and genetics. So the first question is about this. Which approach should be the priority one, improving genetics or feed management?
Okay, I will start to try to share my screen with you. I think it's very, very fair to say that genetics are quite strong across most Eastern European countries. So on that basis, very, very often focusing on improved feeding management can bring the quickest returns. And I certainly think that improving feeding management is areas that I've been involved in, and I see solid improvements so far, but I still think there's improvements that can be made in Eastern European cow feeding to match the genetic ability. As part of that, forage utilization, preservation of forage and optimum rumen function are areas that should be given some really strong focus for all types of cow. And thereafter, I think, as you then build on the genetic improvements of the herd, you're going to bring longer term success. But certainly as a starting point, feeding management is an area to give some focus to. If you just look at forage feeding, certainly producing more litres from forage is absolutely essential. And I'd like just to highlight some British figures from Dairyco from 2018. And what this shows is that across all cow types and all yield bands, the top 25% profitable dairy farms are producing significantly more litres of milk from forage. Even right up to the very, very high yielding herds of 9,000 kilos plus, they are producing 2,000, 2,500, 3,000 more litres of milk from forage. And on the back of that, they are saving on other feed costs. So producing more from forage is important. And when you study the top 25% of the herds, you'll find a very, very high percentage of these herds are using preservatives on their forage. And I would welcome everybody to look at the website cuttoclamp.com, and you'll find lots of resources on that website to look at the benefits and the correct methods of forage preservation. If you look at the genetic potential, I think the first thing to realize is if we can grow a better cow, then that's the way forward. And obviously the youngest heifer calf in your herd, the most recent born calf, should in theory contain the highest genetic potential. And early stage growth is proving to be critical. So one thing I would clearly say here is for every extra gram of live weight in the very, very early growing period, that is going to be worth an extra 5 litres of milk in the first lactation. So very, very simply, if we can achieve an extra 2 kilos of growth in the early period, it's going to be worth 1,000 more kilos of milk in lactation 1. So please, please, please look at the potential of the calves, look at the correct rearing programs. Do not be shy or do not cut corners when it comes to growing your calves. I think it's fair to say if you follow the money, then you will use the very, very best milk formulas available. Saving money on milk formulas doesn't pay if you can achieve the growth, if you can bring the calving age down to 24 months. These heifers that calve at 24 months are consistently outperforming those that are calving at later dates. They're producing more lifetime milk. They have a much higher survival rate by lactation 3. And again, I would ask everybody to visit a website called feedforgrowth.com. Look at the tools available for charting the growth patterns of heifers, and that should be the way forward in my mind. Optimizing the potential. So grow a better calf, optimize forage, and in the first instance, I would probably answer the question by saying focus on feeding management, improving the use of forage, and improving rumen conditions in the cow. And I don't know if you can see that, but there's just a little bit of background on the importance of rearing a good calf and the importance of age at first calving. And as you can see, there's a much higher percentage of these heifers that calve at 23 to 25 months that are surviving in the herd by lactation 3, and they've obviously produced more milk. I hope that answers the question.
Так, Ніл, дуже дякую, дуже вичерпна
Yes,
відповідь.
Neil, thank you. That was very detailed answer. And my next question is this. It follows from the first one. The higher the productivity of cows, how is it differ from the other categories of cows from the point of view of nutrition reaction?
Okay. So the difference, I think, between a higher merit cow and a normal cow is actually quite pronounced. I think it's first, probably as I mentioned earlier, all cow types must optimize dry matter intakes and forage intake to produce milk efficiently. And this is very, very important, again, for all types of cow, and particularly the high merit cow. Rumen conditions must be maintained as close to normal as possible. We always are under the risk of putting greater stress on the higher merit cow. We must allow the cow to have a balanced protein and energy diet. The cow must have the correct rumen conditions to be able to build her own microbial protein, and we must ensure that there's plenty of metabolizable protein entering the small intestine. Energy from fat is an area that's probably least understood in many areas, but certainly energy from fat is important. It's a very, very essential nutrient. Base diet should typically have 3 to 3.5% fat in the dry matter. The high merit cow in the fresh lactation would be requiring between 6 and 8% fat in the dry matter. And some very, very old research work from Don Palmquist in the United States said very simply, fat in must equal fat out. So if you have a cow giving 40 kilos of milk at 4% milk fat, every day 1.6 kilos of fat leaves the cow. The diet must replace that 1.6 kilos of fat. But the danger is we must avoid overfilling the rumen with unsaturated fatty acids in an unprotected liquid form that will have a negative effect on rumen function. So this is the time to consider what type of fats we feed, are they protected, and are we feeding the cows correctly. With the high merit cow, she also has the ability to partition energy far more so than a medium or lower merit cow. The partitioning of energy is very significantly linked to insulin production or the presence of insulin. So when you are feeding the high merit cow, we must be very, very aware of the ingredients that either inhibit or are capable of boosting insulin. Insulin will actually allow the cow to partition energy to body condition and fertility, and not just to milk yield. So typically, if we look at cereals or high starch ingredients, with their glucogenic effect, they will boost the levels of insulin. And we've got to accept that most fats and oils in the diet will resist insulin. So they typically may send energy to the udder via the lymph system. And I'd be thinking here of palmitic acid, C16. However, one fatty acid has the ability to boost insulin, which is oleic acid, C18-1. So we have in this particular fatty acid, we have a almost glucogenic response, and therefore with oleic acid, if we can stimulate insulin production, it becomes a very, very relevant fatty acid to be feeding to the high merit cow in the very, very fresh period, because we want to look after body condition and fertility. And I would just say, from my experiences in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, I do find there is quite a high reliance on a lot of oil byproducts in the diets, in what I call the base diet, in the TMR, such as byproduct feeds from sunflower cakes, soya bean byproduct cakes and meals. And these are very, very often linked to restricted fiber and forage levels. I see lots of diets that are formulated to close to a minimum forage and fiber inclusion. So one of the risks here is, particularly for the high merit cow, if we are then feeding high levels of byproducts that are rich in oils, we're going to have a high level of unsaturated fatty acids kicking around. We can look at depressing dry matter intakes, spoiling fiber digestion, interfering with fatty acid digestibility. So again, we're going to really take a restricted forage diet. If we flood the rumen with free oil, we're not going to be feeding enough fiber. We're going to stimulate an acidosis risk. We will have the added risk of heat stress in season. So we've got to think about changing some of these diets for the high merit cows. We've got to see a little bit less reliance on the high oil byproduct feeds, and greater supplementation with rumen protected fats. Very, very important to get the essential fatty acids such as oleic acid safely through the rumen to the abomasum and small intestine. And of course, a protected fat will not ferment in the rumen, and so you're going to provide energy with less fermentation, less metabolic heat, and to be honest, very, very essential in heat stress times in season. So please, I would advise optimize rumen function. Please be careful about what we call RUFAL, which is rumen unsaturated fatty acid load. And these I found to be quite evident in many Eastern European and Central Asian diets. We tend to have too much free oil in the rumen.
Дуже дякую.
Thank you. You have visited Ukraine many times. Could you please share the experience of being in Ukraine, and what did you witness if we speak about feeding, if we speak about fatty acids ingredients and their use?
Yeah, I've had the pleasure of visiting Ukraine now on a number of times, along with Russia, Kazakhstan, Belarus, and a number of other countries in the region. And I generally believe that I think a lot of the top dairy farms in Ukraine are progressing very, very quickly. I see friends and colleagues that have from other companies have been working hard there too, and I think the feeding management in Ukraine is improving greatly. But I still feel in Ukraine, along with these other states, there is still a little bit of misunderstanding about the value of some of the oil seed cakes and their prevalence in TMR rations. So that's one thing I would say from Ukraine to be aware of. I think when you look at fatty acids, this is a huge area that the business I work for has been working on, with lots of research work from friends in America, Professor Adam Locke and others such, Jonas de Souza. They've looked very, very much into fatty acid research and the importance of understanding these fatty acids in ruminant nutrition. So yes, part of our studies have been to look at the key fatty acids, how digestible they are and what they do, and typically the best responses we can get to feeding fat correctly. So fatty acids are just simple carbon chains, and the C indicates carbon, the number indicates the number of atoms, and as you can see, palmitic acid and stearic acid are what you would call hard fats or saturated fats. They have a very high melting point, and they would typically be safe in the rumen. But very, very importantly, essential fatty acids such as oleic acid, linolenic, they would be liquid form in the rumen. So if they are in high levels in the base diet, then they are at risk in the rumen of hydrogenating to stearic acid. So we must understand the impacts of these various fatty acids. And I think it's long been understood that if you feed too much fat, the digestibility of the fat decreases. And if I can just perhaps point, so if you look here, the more fat we feed, the digestibility decreases. However, if you look at C16-0 or palmitic acid, as we feed more, the digestibility is fairly stable. However, with stearic acid, C18-0, the more we feed, we see a very, very rapid drop in digestibility. So we've got to understand how these fatty acids work in the cow and how we feed in the correct ones to the cow. Interestingly, if you look at oleic acid, C18-1, if we infuse this directly into the abomasum, and interestingly, as we increase the level of oleic acid in the abomasum, the digestibility of fats increased, and the total fatty acids absorbed also increased. So oleic acid, if we can deliver that safely to the abomasum, we're going to improve the digestibility and utilization of all the other fatty acids. And so what do? Well, palmitic acid will generally promote milk yield and in particular milk fat, but we must be very aware of body weight loss in fresh cows because palmitic acid will resist insulin. It will divert all the energy through the lymph to the udder. So the energy from that fatty acid will not be used by the cow, particularly from the high merit cow. It will not be used for body condition. Stearic acid, as we've seen, is energy. It will promote milk yield, but it has very, very poor digestibility. And the more we feed, the worse it gets. With oleic acid, tremendous yield and body condition and fertility effects. So this is highly relevant for the high merit cow, early lactation. Linoleic acid, very, very plentiful in forage. So if we are utilizing the forage diet correctly, we should not need to supplement linoleic acid. Linolenic acid, however, omega-3 you would find in fish oils, in linseed. So very, very good for milk yield and to help with fertility, but very, very difficult to safely deliver to the small intestine. And this is just what I was mentioning about palmitic acid. In a trial control, as you can see, the cows fed palmitic acid versus a negative control. Despite the fact they produce more milk yield and more milk fat, they actually lost an extra 26 kilos of body weight in the first 3 weeks of lactation. The indications there would strongly be that this will have a very negative effect on fertility and reproduction. So one of the dangers of C16 in the high merit cow in the fresh period is you've got to be very careful of the condition of the cow. Interestingly, looking at C16 resistant insulin, again, as we infuse more oleic acid into the abomasum, as the level increased, we saw a spike in plasma insulin. So this goes back to the point I made earlier that oleic acid almost simulates a glucogenic response, in that if you're feeding oleic acid to the fresh cow, she will produce more insulin and she will be able to partition that energy to body condition. So So I would probably say what we've already known is C16 will boost milk fat, petitions the nutrients to milk, resist insulin, but this link between C16 and C18-1 oleic acid, absolutely essential for all merits of cow, but in particular the high merit cow. Stearic acid, poor digestibility. There is little value in supplementing high merit dairy cows with hydrogenated fats that are high in stearic acid. And C18-1 oleic acid, very, very digestible. It will boost the performance of other fatty acids, particularly C16. So yeah, this C16 C18-1 combination is very critical to get the balance correct for feeding the high merit cow in the fresh period. And this just shows some various diets where there were different C16 to C18-1 ratios. So high C16, low C18-1 versus still reasonably high C16, but a much higher oleic acid content, C18-1. And you can see in the first 3 weeks, in terms of energy corrected milk, the high palmitic acid set off very, very well, but by week 3, all very similar. And by week 10, 9 or 10, again, all diets, all different supplement fats produce more weight than the weight of milk than the control, but they were all very, very similar over the period. But if you look at body weight, you can see the high palmitic acid cows, as we expected, lost more weight. And in this, what you might call the breeding period, you can see from a start point, there's quite a gap in body weight, whereas the cows with a higher level of oleic acid, from their start weight to their breeding period weight, we had protected body weight far greater by feeding a higher level of oleic acid in the fresh cow period. So probably a little summary on fatty acids, a quick recap of the research. Palmitic acid will boost milk fat and yield across lactation, but is dangerous for depressing body weight in fresh cows. It will also improve the total tract fiber digestion. So hence, we know this is how part of the reason why it boosts milk fat. Stearic acid will depress fat digestibility fed at high levels. So do not feed high levels to cows, to high merit cows, and be particularly aware if there is a high level of oil byproducts in the base diet, then unprotected in the rumen, a lot of those fatty acids will convert to stearic acid. So again, very, very high levels of oil seed cakes in the TMR run the risk of putting more stearic acid into the small intestine. And oleic acid, very digestible, helps with the digestibility of other fats, and yeah, absolutely allows the cow to partition the energy from that fat to milk yield and body condition and fertility. So a very, very important fatty acid for the high merit cow in the fresh period. There's lots of resources available. I would say please look at megalac.com or volacwilma.com, and you can find all the resources and research work to draw information from to help with planning diets for these high yielding cows. Thank you. I hope that covers that question for you.
Дякую, Ніл. Більш ніж вичерпно. Гарні новини. До нас поступають перші запитання від слухачів. Ніл.
Thank you, Neil. It was a comprehensive presentation. There is a question. What's an opinion better for small farms? Grazing or as feeding them inside the shed for small farms?
Sorry, could you please just repeat that slowly for me? Thank you.
What is your opinion for smaller? In your opinion, what's better for smaller farms? Free grazing or feeding feeds like silage in the shed, in the barn?
I genuinely believe that if you have a small herd, it's a very, very high yielding herd, then I think feeding in the barn, controlling all dietary inputs is the most important. If that small herd is a lower yielding herd or an average yielding herd, then I think in terms of cost effectiveness, it is important to utilize the grazing period and having a combination of outside grazing and inside forage diet feeding. But if it's a high yielding herd, no matter what size of number of cows, I think certainly as the merit and the yield increases, the control of the diet must also increase. And in that respect, having cows inside on a forage TMR system will be more beneficial. And in particular, in warmer times, in the summer months, when you have the ability with fans and mists and sprays, you can control and reduce the impact of heat stress, which you wouldn't be able to do as much with cows that are externally grazed.
Зрозуміло. Ніл, якщо ми вже з вами
as we started talking about fatty acids feeding, what are the achievements? What are the most recent research which influenced balancing rations for the high-yielding cows?
Well, the research that's taken place over the last 5 to 6 years has predominantly taken place in America. And the funding for that started, I would say, maybe 8 to 10 years ago, when in America they started paying more money for butter than they did for protein. So lots of work started on the effects of feeding high levels of palmitic acid to dairy cows. It was from that research that it became very evident that the feeding of palmitic acid historically has been, I think, what you may call at best anecdotal. If you feed more palmitic acid, you get more milk fat, and I think that was the limit of the understanding. And now we find with the research that as we feed more palmitic acid, yes, we do get more milk fat, but we now understand which time we should be feeding it. So for example, if we planned a profile of fatty acids to feed the fresh cow, we would certainly ensure we had a higher ratio of oleic acid in front of the fresh cow and lower palmitic. And then as we hit the peak yield period, we would try to strike an even balance between palmitic and oleic acid. And then as we look post-peak, then there's a benefit to feeding higher levels of palmitic acid. So one of the questions I often get asked in the Ukraine is, which is best, a 99% fat or an 84% fat? And obviously an 84% fat would be a calcium salt fat that would generally be around 50% palmitic acid and 36-37% oleic acid. So relatively speaking, a very high oleic acid fat, or a 99% fat, which most people would recognize as a high palmitic acid product, maybe 80-85% palmitic. And they would say, which is best? And very often the decision beforehand would be, what is the cost? How much does it cost? And then there would be a calculation. How many dollars per kilo of fat? And on that basis, many nutritionists or farmers would work out the best value fat. And what the research has now shown us is that's not the case. That's a poor decision. The decision should now be, which feeding regime allows me to feed the correct protected fat, to produce more milk, to produce more of the right quality of milk, but to maintain the fresh cow, the high merit cow, to look after her body condition in the early lactation, and to make sure that she gets back in calf and produces lots of milk. So the fresh cow, the high merit fresh cow, the 84% fat, a higher level of an 84% fat is the best option for the fresh cow, and the post-peak cow, the most effective way to extend the lactation and get the optimum milk yield is to lean to a higher inclusion of the 99% high palmitic fat.
One more question. Will you tell us, please, what they do in practice, 16.0 and C18? Do most of the nutrition specialists balance C18?
Sorry, do you ask if most nutritionists balance C18? With C18-0, stearic acid, when fatty acids enter the rumen, the first stage of digestion, C18-0 and C16-0 being saturated will safely bypass the rumen. However, C18-1, C18-2, and C18-3 as unsaturated fatty acids will be liquid in the rumen, and they come under attack from enzymes and bacteria, which ultimately will start to hydrogenate them. And so the fatty acids leaving the rumen post-ruminal digestion would be 33% palmitic acid and 66% stearic acid. So when we talk about balancing C18-0, then a very, very high level of that fatty acid leaves the rumen. And again, the more high oil seed byproducts we feed, the higher the level of stearic acid leaving the rumen. So in terms of balancing the ration, when we talk about the inclusion of protected fats, which are an essential ingredient to bridge the energy gap, to bring safe energy without fermentation, acidosis risk, etc., then very, very often nutritionists will still be choosing a protected fat that is high in stearic acid. And what the research has shown us is this isn't the correct way to balance the ration. Feeding a hydrogenated fatty acid in a protected form to a high yielding cow that already has a very high level of stearic acid entering the small intestine from the rumen will only lead to depressed fat digestibility. So far better, I believe, to feed, to balance the ration with a protected fat that offers C18-1, C18-3 if possible, in a rumen protected form, and therefore we have a greater balance of fatty acids entering the abomasum and small intestine. But no, I think at the moment we are still seeing an imbalance in C18-0, and we are still feeding too much C18-0 into the small intestine.
Дуже дякую вам за цікавий.
Thank you so much for this very interesting dialogue and every success in your business. And now we switch to our next speaker. Our next speaker is going to be Maxim Izmesyev, Territorial Manager for Sale in CIS countries and Ukraine. Welcome, Maxim. Producers.
I would like to welcome all experts of dairy farming, milkrite InterPuls. I'm Maxim Izmesyev in the CIS and Eastern Europe. Thank you for this question. Briefly, all types of milking systems, starting from the milk tract, all the way through to carousels, to herringbone type parallel systems, all of them were a product of natural progress of technology over the past 50 to 60 years. And the choice depends on the farmer, on the owner, and on the scope of business. Respectively, either it's a private farm up to 100 cows to large farms with branches in different parts of the country for thousands of cows each. And based on our company's practice and based on the experience with different companies with support of milking equipment, I can say the following thing. This is what we have to do to modernize. So first of all, what we need to focus on what we need to do and how much we need to pay to modernize the equipment. Any equipment costs money. And hierarchy in progress, be it herringbone, parallel, carousel, also increases the cost of the equipment. And parallel system would be the cheapest, then herringbone, then the parallel progress would ensure the simultaneous milking of the whole system, and carousel as the latest option. It costs most of all, but it gives the chance to save the money on production farm, and it gives the chance to increase the speed of milking more than but it's cost effective for the herds of more than 1,000 cows. An important point in all of this is the availability of intellectual team and experienced team that can provide support for the equipment, which becomes more and more advanced. It has electronic elements, it has multiple elements that haven't been there in place 20 to 30 years ago. So I would emphasize the availability of the team. In-house team, because large farms are making their own engineering teams for support of equipment in their farms, or availability of reliable partners for you in your areas, in your regions, perhaps in your districts. The closer they are, the more advanced farm you can be. All of these types of milking parlors consist of the same elements. Pulser, the hanging group, the manages the teat contacts and control panel, automatic withdrawal, control valves, and all of these elements are identical, and they're used in all types of parlors. Herringbone, parallel, carousel. And the key advantage that is provided by our partners is that these components can be mutually replaced depending on the type of parlor that the farm chooses. Automatic milking is an inseparable process, an irreplaceable process for any farm. And all science behind it, all the nutritional matters explained by the previous speaker, all the genetics could suffer a lot as a result of simple mistakes in automatic milking. A high yield, genetically high yield cow can give high yields, and equipment may be unable to either handle the milking or cause discomfort in milking in the contact of the milking group with the teats. So the cow would not be able to fully realize its genetic potential. There is a thin balance, a fine balance. And as specialists, as farmers managing feeding, genetics, and machinery management, you are of course aware of this. You have to rely on your partners, first of all, on your experts. These experts will be giving you this knowledge. Then the teat rubber is a small but extremely important element that can cause discomfort or can cause comfort in milking and reduce the costs of veterinary service and treatment. And good choice and good setup of the milking phase really affects everything. Let me show you the scheme. This is the process of milking. On the left is classic rubber, and in pulsation and vacuum, there's a backslash of milk hitting the teat. And this is one of the irritating factors in milking. And the teat has to remain dry after the milking. If you choose the airflow properly for vacuum, if the air comes from the top, then milk can go down during milking. Milk will only go towards the tanks and there will be no backslash.
Соответственно, после доения не происходит, она остается сухой сосок.
The teat remains dry. The cows are a lot more comfortable. There's less hyperkeratosis at the tip of the teat.
Есть практически схематически, а именно уже.
Here is another practical video of how this all looks. We added food colorant to see the backslash. On the left, we could see the round rubber without ventilation, and you can see the red milk going back into the teat and hitting the teat. And on the right is ventilated option, and the colored milk sits below the glass. I think I've answered your second question.
Да, Максим, дуже дякую. Навздогін вашої думки про те,
Thank you
що...
so much. And just to add to that idea that milking equipment may even cause some diseases of animal diseases, can you mention some examples? How may that happen? Is that due to inadequate hygiene when milking?
Yes, the routine preparation of teat before milking is extremely important when we attach the milkers to the cow. Cross-contamination is also a factor that comes from one infected teat to other 3 healthy teats. And it happens because the milk is getting mixed up, and the backslash of milk infects other healthy teats. And of course, cleanliness and preparation of the teats is extremely important before attachment. Okay, then a logical question on disinfection and cleansing of the milking equipment. How do we do this right?
гигиена и чистка доильного оборудования.
Hygiene and cleaning of milking equipment. One of the key issues is please rely on your equipment, on your automation. The more complex the equipment, the less problems we're going to have. Human factor plays a great role in this. Modern cleaning systems, rinsing systems, flushing systems are programmable for the necessary mix and formula of the elements of parlor and all the elements that need to be cleansed. The sequence of the solutions is programmed automatically. Once again, we need to have a good support team. We need to have good support team and to have good people in place. Our company has developed these methods, and these productive systems are being used actively. For example, Russia is now using a carousel for 72 slots. Okay, Maxim.
Now I recall that I talked to one of farmers in Belarus who said that robotization in an industrial farm is not recommended, not relevant, because it is rather about Dutch Holland farms where 50 or 70 cows, that's already a lot. But if we speak about Belarus, Ukraine, or Russia, that is rather about industrial scale. So will you need so much robotization? So what do you think about robotization of milking process?
I agree. Large farms are our direction for development in the CIS. There's more and more large farms. But robotization is no different from the classic systems. It's not lagging behind the standard classic systems in parallel with herringbone pattern. We also have good experience of the use of more than 30 robots in one system, and it works well only because there's a good support team who can serve and advise properly about the use of this equipment. I agree. Europe often has small farms with small number of cows, and they don't have a shortage of workers, but they are unqualified. And robots make up for the lack of expertise. In the CIS, the workforce is cheap, so the robots are less popular. But there are some successful projects with robots, even in farms with large number of cows, large herds. Well, you have visited Ukraine and Russia and other CIS countries.
Which types of milking equipment are most popular in these countries?
Parallel and herringbone. Parallels are used more and more often. This is sort of the next step with speedy outcome and fast service of these systems. Belarus has given up all of their old systems of milk tracts. Russia still uses some of it. I wouldn't say it's very popular, but with the upgrades of the farms, they upgrade the milk pipelines. And I think we're going to have less and less of those projects.
Clear. And
thank you, Maxim, for exhaustive answers. Let's move on to the next speaker.
To James
Husband,
our next interlocutor. Welcome. a short presentation, introduction of James. He graduated from veterinarian school for 12 years. He practiced in dairy in the UK, and then he established his consultancy in 2018. Consultancy merged with agriculture, and today he acts as technical director of MAP of agriculture. Can you hear us, James?
Yes, I can. Yes, and thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation to speak to you this morning. Yes, I'm happy to carry on.
Давайте з вами поспілкуємося про сучасне управління фермою.
Let's talk about modern farm management. Big data is a very popular thing now in the context of farm management. Which data is the most useful to improve profitability of dairy farms?
Okay, I will share my screen. Okay, great. Okay, so I will just give you a very, very brief background of what we do to give you some context to answer that question on how we reduce the farm data. So what I do and the company does is we are vets, and we do veterinary and nutritional consultancy, often direct to farm, but also in the UK, and the UK is probably a bit of a special case on this, that we do a lot of work where we're looking at the data provided by farms to be able to feed that back to the retailers who sell that milk. So in being able to farms, we've also been able to feed quite a lot of that data back to the farmers themselves. I would also say that we're not a software company. We don't sell software. What we do is collate a lot of the data that is available on farms, and we aggregate it together so that we can use that data more efficiently. When you go to most farms, farming is quite a complicated business, and there's data everywhere. There are decisions to be made every day relating to animal health, relating to fertility. And if you've got 20 decisions to make and you've got very good data to be able to inform you of what are the really important decisions, which are the decisions that need to be made today, which are the decisions that can perhaps be delayed and made later, then you're going to be much more informed about the way you run your business, and you will make much better choices. So the whole idea about using data from farms is that you have to bring the data together so that you can make very informed decisions. So what we're often looking at is, if you go and visit a farm, there could be 20 files, and those files that are sitting on a shelf that nobody looks at very frequently contain a lot of potentially useful information. There can also be information that's sitting on different software systems, and you may have a system that relates to fertility. You may have a system that relates to your milking parlour, and it's an idea about integrating that data together so that you can get better insights, and again, you can make better decisions. So we can all be swimming in data on farms, and the idea is that we actually use it to make better choices. So that's a little bit of background of bringing all these data sources together. What I would say the most important data points that we need to have on farm are data that relate to fertility. Fertility has been talked about already this morning, but I think reproductive performance on farm, I think there was a question asking about, is the European way or the American way, where you're concentrating on fertility versus genetics, which one is the right way? Well, I think in all ways, that you're looking at for managing your cows, the key thing that you have to do is have very good reproductive performance on your farm. So the data that you must have must be data that will allow you to analyze and to manage the reproductive performance on that herd extremely successfully. So as a very basic level of interpretation, you definitely need to know the age at first calving, as that will have a big effect on the farm profitability. And Neil has already mentioned that calving cows in at 24 months is crucial from not just a production point of view, but also from a profitability point of view. You don't want to have those animals in the system not producing milk for any longer than you have to. I'll talk a little bit more about calving interval later, but calving interval, it is a useful figure to know on a farm. It's a slightly historic figure though. You're always looking at data that is up to 9 months out of date. So it's a good starting point, but really when you're managing your reproduction on farm, you have to have data that is much more up to date than that. And so we tend to look now much more at 21-day pregnancy rates, which incorporates estrus detection and also conception rates. And ideally, if you've got a system so that when the pregnancy diagnosis has been done, is immediately put onto a system that you can analyze straight afterwards, you can look at the way that your reproductive performance is going. Mastitis, obviously crucial as well, and not always well recorded on farms, but as a minimum, you need a system to be able to manage your treatment records for all clinical cases that are on the farm. Because if you come in as a vet to analyze what's going on for mastitis and to be able to direct where you're going to spend some money potentially to improve the system for mastitis control, you need to know whether it's a problem with clinical mastitis or subclinical mastitis. Is it a problem that comes from the dry period, or is it a problem that comes from the lactation? So there are crucial things that you need to know. And milk recording, I'll show you some milk recording data later from Latvia, but milk recording data is extremely useful if available, because that allows you to look at which cows are subclinically infected, and so you can have decisions, you can make the right decisions when you're drying those cows off, if you want to use selective dry cow therapy where you're not using antibiotics, which can have huge benefits. Lameness, very, very poorly recorded in the UK and in most countries, I think. Hugely underestimated, and it's extremely important because you can look at your diets and you can say, right, these cows should be getting enough nutrients to get fertile at the correct times. But if you've got lame cows, those cows will be losing condition because of that, and that can have a huge negative effect. So lameness records are crucial. And as a rule, people record treatment records very poorly. And often we have to just use mobility scores. So what we try to do in the UK and in other countries, especially where you're selling your milk to a retailer when they want to know that the level of lameness is very low in that herd, is you'll do mobility scores, and you'll do that maybe, well, ideally you would do it every month. So you can look at the cows, you can say which cows are lame. If they were lame last month, have they got better? So are they recovering? So lameness for us, it's a crucial disease to be estimating it on farm, and obviously being able to do something that is going to be a targeted intervention if you want to improve that. So to finish off answering that question, most farms should have some farm management or parlour software, and this is essential to save management time. And it allows you to do things like cattle registration automatically, which needs to be done correctly. Crucially, medicine records. It's getting very, very important for retailers. Again, I'm talking about retailers because that's quite a big emphasis in the European Union in a broader sense. And they're very, the retailers in the European Union are often looking that you have to have records that your antibiotics are being used effectively and you're not using critically important antibiotics as well. And the other important things from a management point of view that your parlour software and your management software can tell you is which cows are under antibiotic withdrawal. Obviously essential that those cows' milk doesn't go into the tank and cause a antibiotic failure, which cows need drying off at the right time, which cows need pregnancy checking, and which cows need serving. So to answer that question, I would say fertility is the crucial central thing that you have to get. Mastitis and lameness, and also very good management software to save you a lot of time.
Just a small off-top. In Ukraine, is farming management systems are getting popular, which provide huge masses of data to farms about machinery movements, irrigation, and so on. And there are problems when the agro company gets these huge volumes of data. They don't know what to do with it, how to use it in practice. Is there such a problem with dairy farms? You mentioned already which are important data to provide to consultants to combine them in the right way, and how to transform it in practice?
That is a very good question, and I would say yes, the problems do exist in the dairy sector as well, that we have lots and lots of data, but actually using that data to get something that gives you an informed way of making a decision is still not anywhere near perfect. And I think probably most farms, what they need to do is to define which bits of data are most crucial to manage their businesses and to find the software that is closest to doing that. And then ideally, what we're finding is, because as I said, we're not actually making software, what we're doing is trying to communicate with lots of different companies. So for instance, if you were to have some parlour software, and that parlour software allowed data sharing with other companies like ourselves, for instance, they would allow us to access that data if the farmer gave us permission to do so. And you would also then get data from maybe the cow sensors that you're using for heat detection, and maybe you'd also be looking at the registration for the animals with your central database in the Ukraine. And you can bring all those bits of data together. And that's what we've been trying to do for our clients. I would say that at the moment, there's no perfect solution to it. There is, the companies are starting now to allow their systems to talk more together. And with the farmer's permission, you're allowed to share data. But often these systems sort of have to be built on a country level specification, so that you can have something that is useful to the farmers. But what we've found, which I'll probably talk a little bit about later, is that we're often aggregating data for the milk companies. So the milk companies will say, we want to be able to check that these farms are okay. We want to be able to predict how much milk we're going to get from those farms. And so the milk companies pay us to create a system that can then aggregate the data together. And that data is then fed to the farmers, and the farmers have it for free. So there's different systems of the way it's paid for in different countries. But at the moment, there's no perfect solution that does it for dairy. There are things that are good, but there's no perfect solution yet.
Джеймс, до речі, ви сказали про...
You mentioned about the experience of different countries. In Ukraine, we're just forming the outsourcing culture. In many ways, agri producers didn't trust to external consultants. They thought they knew everything, but now the mindset changes, generation change, and younger people have more trust in external consultants, and older generation also see where there are mistakes that they would be useful to get help from outside. The culture outsourcing, how is it developed in the UK in the dairy sector? That's the question to you.
Yes. I think that we would have similar problems in the UK too, that you'll have people that don't want to share their data. They haven't seen the value in sharing data, but that's changing now. And so if people feel that they have a problem that they want to resolve, and they share data through data that is being collected on that farm, and that data is passed to other companies, so that you can put two pieces of data together and you can get something that is better than those two individual bits of data sat separately, then that is starting to be shared. And I would say, and I'm sorry to keep on mentioning it, but one of the things that we found is, because the milk buyers, the big companies and the retailers have been very, very enthusiastic about knowing what the farmers that are supplying them are doing, because there's a lot of questions asked around, are the cows lame? Do you have too much mastitis? Do the cows go to grass? Lots of considerations that are important for consumers in the UK. The supermarkets and the milk buyers have probably led the way in making sharing more common, and making sure that the data doesn't just sit on farms, it actually gets shared around, and so people can share that data and they can benchmark it, and they could show what we've got with some of the retailers is you'd have 200 or 300 farms, and you'd be checking against maybe 25 different parameters relating to lots of diseases and ways that people do things on farm, and you'd be able to benchmark all that data. And so one of the big examples would be when we ask farmers, what do you think your mortality rate is in your calves that are under 28 days? They normally say 5%, 6%. When we actually get the data centrally, so this is data from cattle registration, we find it is more likely to be 10 to 12%. And so they realize they've had a problem, and especially when you share it and you show them what 200 other farms are doing, you know straight away whether you're good and bad. So yeah, the sharing is getting more common, and it does make farmers better because they know what everyone else is doing, and they know where their weaknesses are. I hope that's answered that question.
Так, більш ніж вичерпно.
Yes, you did more than comprehensively. James, probably you anticipated my next question. It was about the value of data. It's related not only to a particular farm, but in general for retailers, as you mentioned, and for seeing the complete picture of the dairy business.
Yeah. Yes, the value of it, that's a really interesting question, because if you look at it for the value to the farmer, there is enormous value to the farmer, because the farmer, as we've already talked about, can make very informed decisions about what they do on the farm. You can also then make it slightly wider, that you can see where the farmer is against other farmers. So you can see in areas that you're good and you're bad. But actually that data has a lot of value to other companies. So for instance, again, talking about the retailers in the UK, they will pay more money to be able to know exactly what is going on that farm. So the milk price that they will set will tend to be, it can be 2 to 3 to 4 pence per litre more. So that can be, sometimes that can be 20 or 30% more than the market value. And for the farmers to get that extra money, they have to say yes to sharing their farm data. So there is value for the farmer, but there's also value in the milk companies that getting supplied by those farms, because they want to know what's going on those farms so that they can sell it on to retailers at a higher value. We're also seeing, and it's still very, very early days, but if there's a lot of information from, say, several hundred or 1,000 farms in a country, and that information could then be permissioned, so the farmer obviously has to give their permission to share that data, and the amount of money the farmer receives will be related to how much personal information about his farm he wants to share. But there is obviously value in selling that to companies that could say, okay, we think this year it's going to be a good year for, let's say, maize production, because you've seen what everybody's intentions are for growing maize. Therefore, a company that provides equipment for doing maize harvesting, for instance, they will see value in that data, commercial value. So there's lots of ways, going from individual farm and how they use the data to retailers to broader companies that see it as commercial value, that is probably going to get much bigger as time goes on. And we're almost seeing it as a way, as like an extra crop for the farmers, that if they are prepared to share their data, they get more money. There's obviously, there's important examples and lessons to be learned from where data has been shared by companies without people's permission, and that side of permissioning your data so that it goes to the right people is crucial. That has to be correct. Permissioning has to be very transparent, or nobody is going to share anything.
Джеймс, як ви сказали, для того, щоб...
So, James, as you mentioned, in order to know what's happening at the farm, you need to be there in the field. Has the lockdown regime somehow impacted your visits to the farms and perception of the picture in general?
Yes, yes, I'll show you. I'll take you on to where are we? The data and COVID-19. Yes, well, we spend a lot of our time visiting farms that we normally know reasonably well. So it would be farms that we would have already gauged whether the management was generally quite good or not so good. So then you have an idea of if you can't visit, what data do we need to make sure that everything carries on that farm okay? And what we've been really surprised about is that for at least 4 months, we didn't go to any farms, and we had to keep in touch with farmers using means like this, like Zoom. And the adoption of this sort of technology was incredibly rapid. If COVID had happened 5 or 10 years before, I don't think we would have been able to have communicated so effectively with our farmers. But we did find that we weren't visiting our farmers, but as long as we had Zoom meetings with key personnel involved, and we had good data feeds which were already set up for those farms, we could have an hour meeting, and in an hour we could probably save 3 or 4 hours from before, when we would have to have traveled to the farm and wasted sometimes quite a lot of time when perhaps it wasn't necessary to visit as frequently as we were. So we find that as long as you set up the relevant data feeds, you can actually you can do remote assessments of farms to see how things are going quite effectively. We've done a lot of this as well for farm compliance people in the UK. So Red Tractor, for instance, Red Tractor, more than 95% of dairy farms in the UK will be compliant to the Red Tractor brand for compliance. And obviously, as soon as COVID happened, those farms couldn't be visited. So we provided a portal so that they could, the farmers could upload pictures about relevant areas. They could upload information. You could all bring in the information from milk recording, from all the other areas that you had data from on the farm, and you could do remote audits. And that's we see as a big area going forward, to do remote consultancy and remote compliance visits, well, virtual visits. I mean, to go on from that, we would often turn up on farm with, this is what we do for our nutritional work. You turn up on farm, and some farms will have a lot of information. Some farms, though, you're just starting from a point of how many litres are you producing and how many cows have you got? And so you divide one by the other and you say, okay, they're producing 15 litres per day. And as you could go more and more into depth, and you can set up these data feeds on farms, so that once you've done it once, you know that this format can be filled in remotely, easily. You've got a lot of information to be able to do remote visits. And you can do that for lots of other things as well. You can do it for fertility data. I can show you examples of these farm reports. So these farm reports are generated using milk recording files that we just run through an online tool. And within 2 minutes, these reports are emailed to you, and they tell you what the farm is doing for the key performance indicators for the farm. And I think there's so much potential for not having to have people going to your farm as frequently, and to be able to get very useful information from those farms. Okay.
Дякую, James.
Thank you, James. James, now we see that various meters and sensors become popular in farms. In the context of a dairy farm, what is the set of functions that they need to be equipped with, so that we could see that here they are actually, this is about marketing, and here they produce some profitability?
Yep. Yes, that's a very good question. And there are a huge array of sensors that you see on farms. We often get asked the question by dairy clients, usually in the UK, that will say, should I buy sensors for my farm, because it is a considerable investment of money? And I think the starting point that we usually take on that is, well, what areas are those sensors going to help you with? And at the moment, are you performing well or badly in those areas? So for instance, there's a farm here with the data I'm showing you, and that farm has a calving interval that I think we probably all agree is way too high. So the calving interval is about 450 days at the time of this report. So it looks like reproductive performance is very bad, but there are lots of elements to reproductive performance. We can see here, this is the percentage of the cows that have calved in the last 12 months with a calving interval less than 400 days. And normally we would find that you would expect more than 60% of cows that would calve with a calving interval less than 400 days. And the best farms will calve with 80% of their cows under 400 days. So here he clearly has a problem with cows that are not getting pregnant quickly enough, and his calving interval is much too long. So this is really not profitable. The days in milk, which obviously is an indicator of your calving interval, is much too high. We normally would try and get people to be 180 days or less on an all year round calving herd. This herd was creeping up to well over 200 days. So there was a problem with reproduction. But actually, if you were buying a set of sensors to be able to do heat detection, you'd look at this farm and say, actually, his heat detection is not that bad, because here you can look at your intervals between one service and the next. And what you would expect is, if a cow is served and she is not pregnant to that service, we would try and reserve her again 19 to 26 days later. And what we try and get is more than 40% of cows that you're picking up 19 to 26 days later. And ideally, that would be 50%. This herd, even though the calving interval is very bad, it really doesn't look that it is related to the heat detection. So if you were going to buy this for heat detection, you would not, perhaps for this farm, wouldn't be the best decision, because his heat detection is not that bad. There's something else going on this herd that is causing this problem. So you need to first check to make sure the farm needs the services that these sensors are actually providing. The key things that these sensors do provide, and I think they do provide it very accurately now for most of the good sensors, is heat detection. So if you're going to buy a sensor, it has to do heat detection accurately. As there's more development of the sensors, you see sensors now that will detect sick cows. For us in the UK, that is an absolutely crucial skill, and I can't comment on what happens in Ukraine on this, because I don't know the quality of the staff that you have working on the farms. But we find that getting people to work on farms in the UK is quite difficult. And we often have staff that really probably isn't quite good enough to be able to pick up sick cows. And so cows get left maybe for 3, 4, 5 days before you've had them looked at and you've treated them. And this is a big problem. So detecting sick cows can be really useful, especially if the staff that you have working on your farms is not good enough. It helps you enormously to find those cows early. And also now, I've mentioned lame cows, hugely under-recorded and under-detected. You need to be able to now have sensors that will detect lame cows, and they will do that. There's good algorithms that allow the sensors that are mounted on the neck and the ears to detect lameness quite effectively. Again, going back to budget, what I tend to say to clients is look at it as a 5-year investment. And what you used to find is that you'd buy a cow sensor, and maybe after 3-4 years, 30-40% of the sensors weren't working. Now you have to be able to have some sort of contract that if you buy them or if you rent them, you have a full 5 years of use, so that you know your investment is so much and you're going to get 5 years per cow. So as I say, heat detection has to be really good. Rumination, really useful. I've found clients having that. Again, if you've got acidosis or if cows are starting to be sick and they're not eating as much, it will pick those up. Some of the sensors will do localization, so it'll tell you where cows spend most of their time in a shed. That could be quite useful actually, as well, you know, how well are those sheds designed? Are the cows all standing in one place and they're not using certain cubicles? So it gives you an idea of whether your sheds are good or bad, and the health, as I've mentioned. And I think budget-wise, you need to be looking that it's going to cost you for all those functions, and you'll get, you know, that there's added value functions that can cost you a bit more or less, but round about, it's going to cost you 200 euros per cow over 5 years, and that's the sort of investment. But first, before you put them in, and there's, you know, there's plenty of good ones. These are all good sensors I've got listed here. You know, make sure that you need them. I think people often do, but you know, make sure you need them, and then set your investment and get 5 years out of it. Okay.
James, нам поступають запитання.
James, we have more questions from our audience. One of them is about one of your first slides where you showed us 20 folders. How much time does it take to switch from paperwork in a farm to online procedures and to understand and master this scope of data that you presented today?
that's quite a difficult question to answer because it will vary depending on what you want included in the system. But in general, you know, say if you've already have a system in place on farm for your parlour software system, for instance, or some other piece of software that you have, if you were just to get the data out of that system and to connect it with something else, you can provide quite easily, you can provide dashboards, and those dashboards, we often do these dashboards for, again, for milk companies, and they are designed to be as easy to check as possible. So I can't answer that question very accurately because it does depend on what you're trying to do. But the whole idea about these systems is that you have to make them time saving, and so you design them so that they're as time saving as you possibly can make them, and also that, you know, maybe you don't want to see 200 things that are happening on your farm every day. There's 5 things that you say these are the most important, and those are the ones you concentrate on. So it's a little bit difficult, but I think what you have to do is when you start to make the changeover, you can't have 2 systems. You've just got to say, right, from now on, we're going to try and go as digital as we possibly can. Otherwise, you're spending time doing your books and you're spending time doing the digital. You have to make it as digital as you can, which means things like using apps. Everybody has a smartphone now, and usually the signal is good in most places. So you have apps so that if you're treating a cow for mastitis or lameness, you can have something that right next to the cow, you've said cow 205, she has had an injection of Sinolox, and so you've automatically updated your medicines book, and you've also updated the fact that you've had a diseased animal. So you've recorded the mastitis or the lameness, and you've also recorded the treatment. So try and digitalize as much as you can, and try and go into it completely. It's much better to have one system that is going to work for you rather than to have lots of systems.
Зрозуміло. James, дуже дякую вам.
Clear, and thank you so much, James, for very interesting presentation, for interesting answers to our questions. We still have some questions to previous speakers, in particular to Maxim. Are you with us, Maxim?
Максим?
Да.
Да, Максим.
So the question from someone from our audience is this: is there the difference between the round and triangular resin? Because you often highlight that in your during your offline events. So any difference in form, depending on the form?
There is a difference about the effect in milking from round rubber to triangular rubber. Triangular rubber still gives the space for backslash of milk. So unlike round rubber, where 2 walls are coming together right under the teat.
Next factor is triangular rubber with ventilation. That moves milk without a backsplash. And there is a difference from a classical rubber technology. I see.
Clear. Thank you. And another question goes to Neil. Can you hear us, Neil?
Yes, I can hear you.
As far as I remember, you mentioned that in Ukraine, they often use soybeans and sunflower seed cake to feed cattle. So what is the ration, how to add it to feeds, and if they cause no damage if you give too much of them?
I think the secret is, yes, they're all sunflower cakes, soybean cakes, and in particular the byproducts from them are all very valuable feeds. And they're also usually very good value feeds. So their inclusion in the cow's diet is accepted as the norm. But I think what we've got to look at for these very, very high merit cows is there's got to be some degree of restriction of the amount used just to protect rumen function better for these high merit cows. And this is where the restriction, a slight restriction of the amount fed will allow for better forage utilization. And I believe the inclusion of other protected fat sources would allow better rumen function, safer energy supply, and a more balanced diet for particularly the very, very high merit, high yielding cows.
Зрозуміло. Колеги, співрозмовники.
Okay. Dear colleagues, our interlocutors, thank you very much for interesting presentations. I hope the audience was also pleased with these presentations and answers. If you'd like to connect with our presenters, we'll share their contacts. Thank you very much for participation, and see you again under the aegis of the British Embassy.
Thank you all very much. It's been an enjoyable event, and enjoyed it very, very much. Enjoyed listening to James and Maxim too. So thank you very much. And yes, please share my details, and happy to be approached individually by anyone who has any more questions on the topics covered. Many thanks.
Yes, I would echo the same. Thank you very much for the invitation, and happy to connect with anybody who's on the conference this morning.
Дякую, колеги, і до зустрічі.
Thank you once again, colleagues, and see you again.